So it's been a good few years since I last regularly posted on this channel, and I thought it's about time I talked about where I've been in all that time. So if we go back 4 years or so, around the time of lockdown, I put a video online saying something was going on with my guitar playing. I wasn't able to play the guitar in the way I used to be able to play it, and I didn't understand why. I wasn't responding to practice in any way, just something weird was going on inside of me. And a few of you mentioned something called musician's dystonia, which is something I'd never heard of before, or task-specific dystonia or focal dystonia. So I started to look at these and see whether that related to me. But at the time I had no idea just how far this was going to take me. So as the condition developed for me, and as I started to read around this more, I realized that this wasn't something I was just going to be able to work through. In fact, this was far worse than that. A lot of people describe this as being a career killer. Now, I've been a guitarist since I was a small child, since I was 7 or 8 or something, and by the time I was in my mid-teens, maybe 14 or 15, I was able to do all of the fingerstyle stuff that I showed on my channel. From 14 up to my mid-50s, I was able to play like that fluently. And then suddenly this had all been taken away from me. And I know it's kind of hard for non-musicians to truly understand this, but it's part of who I am. It's part of what makes me me, and to have it all just suddenly removed from me was horrific. It was truly devastating to me. So the condition evolved, it got worse and worse, and it got to the point where whenever I put my right hand near a guitar ready to play, my fingers started twitching. They started randomly just plucking the strings like some kind of a Tourette's tic. But it was only when I was playing the guitar. As soon as I tried to play any music at all, my middle finger just clamped into my hand. And then to play, I had to physically kind of try and straighten my fingers. So my right hand was this mess of me trying to fight the dystonia clamping my finger into my palm. And my fingers were moving in all kinds of weird contorted ways as I was battling the tension that was going on in my hand. Effectively, I just couldn't play at all. And the fact that this was hidden, invisible to onlookers, somehow made this so much worse for me as well. It felt truly evil. It was like this was a condition that was specifically targeted. It just invisibly focused on playing the guitar. This was designed to stop me playing the guitar. And the fact that it was invisible to onlookers meant no one really understood what I was going through, understood the devastation that this was causing to me as well. I remember saying to my wife, I wish I'd been in a road accident and I'd lost my hand, because at least if I'd lost my hand, people would see the trauma that I was going through inside. But as it was just all invisible to everyone. So I found I could play with a pick. That was something. So I didn't actually stop gigging. I was still playing the guitar to some degree, but I felt like a fraud because I just didn't have anything like the skill available to me, the technique available to me that I used to have before the onset of dystonia. It was like I used to be able to fly, and now I was grounded. I felt like an Olympic athlete who could barely finish a park run. I felt totally useless, basically. And that's why the YouTube videos dried up. I just couldn't face putting things online knowing that I could no longer back it up. Throughout all of this, I was looking for help. I did contact my local doctor, my local GP. Obviously, they'd never encountered this. This is such a weird condition. They did put me in touch with a neurologist based at the local hospital, so I went for a consultation there as well. The best they could offer me though was Botox. The standard treatment for dystonia is to inject the muscle suffering from dystonia with Botox, and that will numb the muscle, which will stop the symptoms. But obviously, as the Botox wears off, the dystonia will come back again. Plus, how am I going to play the guitar if my muscle's paralyzed with Botox? So that seemed like a non-starter to me. One of the people who saw my original videos recommended that I get in touch with someone called Joaquin Fabra, which I did, and I'll be eternally grateful to the guy who recommended him and to Joaquin as well. Unfortunately, I have heard subsequently that Joaquin's died, but Joaquin was probably one of the few people that allowed me to start to understand what was going on inside of me and really helped me understand the psychological side of this condition and helped me to start to find ways of dealing with it. The other thing I did was I looked at the medical research. Thankfully, with the internet now, you can look at research papers directly online, and I started doing that, and I discovered that the cutting edge research is actually quite a long way ahead of the kinds of things that the neurologist was suggesting they needed to do for me. And also I started reaching out to some of the researchers involved in these papers, and there was one woman in particular, a UK-based researcher, who entered into correspondence with me as well. So I was bouncing ideas off her. She was talking about some of the things that she was doing, some of the promising results she'd read elsewhere as well. So again, she was really helpful for me. And eventually I started to create my own mental model of what dystonia was, which was pretty much based on a combination of the conversations I'd had with all of these people, with the research papers that I'd read, and also based on my own lived experience as well. One thing you should be aware of with dystonia, as I say, no one really has a full understanding of what dystonia is or how you can cure it. It's still very much part of the ongoing research. So anyone who tells you they understand dystonia and they can cure it, you need to use a healthy level of skepticism when you hear from them. And that includes me as well. All I'm doing is talking to you about my own lived experience. What helped me though was to understand this from 2 points of view. So the first thing that kind of helped to was the realization that this was a real physical condition. It wasn't just psychosomatic, it wasn't just faulty beliefs. You couldn't just hypnotize this away. You could see this in brain scans and things like that. But it does have a psychological component to it as well. And from my own reading around this, you can think of this in 3 ways. A lot of victims of dystonia have some kind of old trauma associated with them, some kind of traumatic history, or some kind of history of chronic stress. So there's this underlying stress condition behind it. Then typically there was some kind of a trigger that caused the dystonia. And again, that had some kind of emotional content and some kind of stress content to that. And finally, the dystonia itself has its own psychological aspects to it as well. I mean, you can't be wishing that you'd lost your own hand and be thinking clearly, obviously. So that was something that I had to deal with. I had to change my faulty thinking, and I had to re-establish a sort of a calmer view, a more clinical view of my dystonia. The second thing was, this was a physical condition. The neurological pathways associated with me playing the guitar were miswired or broken or misfiring in some way. So that was something that I had to deal with. And the way I envisaged this is, if you imagine there's a scale of your expertise at playing the guitar where at 0 you're a beginner, and at 100 you're an elite level player. Dystonia effectively puts you at -100. So you've got to undo this faulty wiring before you can start to reintroduce the proper movements again. And so I fully understand why I hear about guitarists who learn to play left-handed rather than right-handed, and then teach themselves to play the guitar from scratch again, because they actually do move themselves a lot further forward than if you just try and fix this. But it is possible to fix this. There's an area of research around something called neuroplasticity, which was something that I invested a lot of time and effort in understanding how the brain wires itself, how the brain forgets how to do bad habits, which is how I kind of envisaged the dystonia, and how it installs good habits, how it rewires itself. That took a different approach. That's a different approach to learning as a musician, practicing as a musician. It's much more taking a mindset of physiotherapy rather than musical practice. In fact, in a lot of ways, musical practice pushes you backwards, because what can happen when you try and practice this away is that you continue to fire these faulty neurological pathways, and what you practice just gets stronger. And so this is one of the things that happen in the early days of the onset of dystonia. Very common for musicians to try and practice this stuff away. And what happens is it just gets worse and worse and worse. And what you need to do is to break that habit, to move away from that, to allow the faulty movements to fade and to install new healthy neurological pathways. And that's what I mean when I talk about approaching it from a physiotherapy point of view. Once I had this model in place, once I had the concept of dealing with this both from a psychological point of view and also from a physiotherapy point of view, I actually started improving. It was a slow, steady progress, but I did see progress. And I'm so far along that journey now. I'm still not out the other side yet, but I get what I call micro movements in my hand now. I don't get that full dystonia cramp anymore. That's a thing of the past. So a micro movement is a very slight twitch in my fingers in certain conditions. Also, I get these micro movements in what I call compound movements. By compound movement, I mean there's a difference between, for example, if I move my fingers individually, like my third finger, my second finger, my first finger, that's me thinking about these individual movements. But when I drum my fingers on the table, I'm thinking about this as one movement. And that's a compound movement. And I get occasional dystonia in these compound movements in the middle of that. And these are particularly difficult to deal with because you can't just slow a compound movement down. As soon as you slow it down, it becomes the discrete movements, not the compound movement. So it makes it that much harder to deal with. But there are approaches that seem to work for me with that. So that's the direction I'm heading with it. So now I'm at a place where psychologically and physically, I feel like I'm ready to start to contribute to the channel again. So that's why I'm back. A lot of my dystonia recovery is not really relevant for healthy players. And so I need to think about how I want to talk about this, if I do at all, because, you know, I'm not a medical practitioner, so I'm not sure whether I should really be talking about it or how useful this would be for most people who watch this channel. So that's something that I'm working through right now. But a lot of my dystonia recovery is useful. So for example, for a large part of the early period, I was treating dystonia as physiotherapy, but there became a point as the dystonia was subsiding that I could start to think about music from a musician's point of view again. And you can imagine I'd had 3 or 4 years of being unable to practice the guitar at all. So I needed to build my skills back again. And some of the exercises and some of the ideas that I used there will be very relevant to anyone who wants to build their fingerstyle technique. There are some things around mindset and different concepts that could be relevant to you as well. For example, I had no idea that my mindset could literally break me as it did with the dystonia. So it's worth talking about that, worth understanding that, worth understanding stress and how you mitigate stress and how you manage stress as a player. It's worth talking about the value of deliberate variation as opposed to woodshedding. With woodshedding, you tend to focus deliberately on honing these fine skills, fine motor skills, building up your speed. Very important as you become more of an elite player, but it has downsides as well, and those downsides can be mitigated by introducing the concept of deliberate variation. And that was very important in terms of my own physiotherapy as well. As I said earlier, you can almost think of dystonia as the mother of all bad habits that you have to figure out how to let go of. So managing bad habits, getting rid of bad habits is something that I've had to really properly understand through my own recovery from my dystonia. Anyway, I hope to be posting much more regularly now. So that's a good thing. We'll just see how things develop. I don't want to put myself under pressure again. But if any of this stuff resonates with you, then feel free to reach out to me. Love to hear from you. Finally, I want to thank you for all of the support that you've offered me over the years that I've been away. I read all of my comments. My channel's small enough where I can read all of the comments that you leave me. I can see the likes that you've left on the video. I can see the fact that my videos are still being viewed after all this time, which has been a huge help for me. And so I hope to be able to contribute again to this channel. Anyway, I think that's enough for this video.